Most people think they already understand why people stay in bad relationships. They say it is low self-respect, weak boundaries, desperation, denial, trauma, fear of being alone. And sometimes those explanations are partly true. But they do not go deep enough, because the real reason people stay is often much darker, much older, and much more uncomfortable than most people realize. Many people do not stay because the relationship feels good. They stay because leaving feels more dangerous than staying. And that is a very different thing. Because once a relationship gets wired into your nervous system as a source of safety, attachment, identity, and emotional survival, the brain can start treating separation like a threat, even when the relationship itself is painful. That means a person can fully understand that something is hurting them, and still feel pulled toward it. Not because they are stupid, not because they enjoy suffering, but because some ancient part of the human system would rather stay inside familiar pain than step into uncertain loss. And if that sounds irrational, it should. Because a lot of human attachment is not built on logic, it is built on survival. To understand why, you have to go back to a world where close bonds were not just emotional, they were protective. For most of human history, being alone was not just sad, it was risky. Humans survived through closeness, through pair bonds, through family systems, through tribes, through predictable connection. A stable bond could mean food sharing, childcare, protection, emotional regulation. A broken bond could mean instability, vulnerability, and exposure. So the brain did what evolution always does. It adapted. It learned that attachment matters. It learned that losing connection can hurt. And it learned something even more powerful than that. It learned that uncertainty inside attachment can become an emergency. Most people imagine dangerous relationships as something obvious: constant cruelty, constant chaos, constant pain. But many unhealthy relationships are not built on non-stop pain. They are built on inconsistency, affection, then withdrawal, reassurance, then confusion, intimacy, then silence, love, then punishment. And that pattern matters because the human nervous system is deeply sensitive not only to pain, but to unpredictable reward. When comfort appears and disappears without stability, the brain does not simply relax and move on. It starts monitoring, it starts hoping, it starts chasing the return of safety. This is one reason people become so bonded to relationships that are hurting them. The relationship is not just producing pain, it is also producing relief. If someone hurts you, confuses you, distances themselves, and then suddenly gives you warmth again, the body may experience that warmth almost like rescue. The same person creating the wound begins to feel like the only person who can soothe it. That is a brutal loop, because now the attachment is no longer just romantic, it is regulatory. The relationship starts controlling your emotional temperature. Their text calms you. Their silence destabilizes you. Their affection gives you hope. Their withdrawal sends you into panic. At that point, leaving does not just feel like ending a relationship. It feels like losing access to regulation itself. Their mind may be saying, "This is draining me," but their body may be saying, "Do not lose the source," even if the source is unstable, even if the source is damaging, even if the source is the reason you are in pain in the first place. And the deeper the attachment gets, the more modern life starts to disguise that survival logic in everyday language. People call it love, they call it chemistry, they call it history, they call it loyalty, they call it seeing the good in someone, they call it giving one more chance. Sometimes it is those things, but sometimes it is a nervous system trapped in a cycle of threat and relief. Sometimes what feels like deep love is actually deep conditioning. Because it means staying is not always about what you believe. Sometimes it is about what your body has learned to fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of empty space, fear of starting over, fear of becoming invisible in your own life, fear that the pain you know is still safer than the future you do not. This is also why bad relationships often become more powerful, not less powerful, after repeated disappointment. The outside observer expects pain to push someone away. But in many cases, pain makes the person cling harder. Why? Because the relationship becomes a problem the mind keeps trying to solve. If only they change. If only we get back to how it was. Now the person is no longer attached only to who their partner is. They are attached to who the partner might become. They are attached to the memory of the beginning. They are attached to the promise of relief. And they are attached to the idea that all this pain must eventually mean something. Because walking away would not just mean losing the person. It would mean grieving not only the relationship, but the fantasy that kept the relationship alive. And people will endure an astonishing amount of suffering to avoid a collapse like that. But there is something even more unsettling happening underneath all of this. They can slowly reshape your sense of self. Over time, people adapt. They start measuring their mood through someone else's responses. They become hyper-aware of tone, hyper-aware of delay, facial expression, texting rhythm, emotional weather, and subtle signs of withdrawal. They learn what to avoid, what to say carefully, what parts of themselves to shrink, what needs to suppress, what truths to postpone. And eventually, survival inside the relationship becomes a full-time identity. At that point, leaving can feel terrifying for another reason. That sounds strange, but it happens all the time. People do not just bond to love, they bond to routine, to predictability, to roles, to being the one who fixes things, the one who waits, the one who understands, the one who forgives, the one who stays. So when outsiders say, "Just leave," they are often missing the real scale of the threat. Leaving can feel like disorientation, exposure, identity collapse, and emotional free fall. People often feel most desperate right after moments of pain. And tragically, the same person who caused the destabilization becomes the person the body wants for relief. That is how the cycle keeps renewing itself. Pain, distance, anxiety, repair, hope, repeat. Eventually, the relationship stops functioning like a bond and starts functioning like a closed system. This is why loneliness can feel less frightening than it sounds in theory, but more frightening than anything when you are actually standing at the edge of leaving. Because what people fear is not just being single. They fear the silence after constant stimulation. They fear the loss of daily contact. They fear the empty apartment, the unshared joke, the missing message, the first weekend that feels too long. And once again, the brain does not always interpret those things as ordinary discomfort. Sometimes it interprets them as danger. That is why people return. That is why they excuse red flags they already understand. That is why they minimize disrespect. That is why they confuse longing with love. A calm relationship may feel unfamiliar. A healthy relationship may feel almost suspicious. Chaos feels alive. Peace feels strange. People do not always move toward what is good for them. They often move toward what feels familiar enough to survive. The real reason people stay in bad relationships is not always that they do not see the damage. Very often, they see it. The real problem is that insight alone does not automatically calm a survival system. You can know someone is wrong for you and still panic when they pull away. You can want freedom and still mourn the cage. Because the attachment was never just emotional, it became biological, ritualized, internalized, and in many cases, what people are really attached to is not the person in front of them. It is the hope, the regulation, the familiarity, the role, and the promise of safety. That is what makes leaving so hard. Not just losing love. losing a structure your mind and body built themselves around. And once that line blurs, bad relationships stop looking like simple bad decisions. They start looking like ancient fear wearing the language of romance.